Hi, comrade. Welcome to our podcast series. These episodes feature the best of Lab-Left, an international forum organized by Szikra Movement in collaboration with Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. We gathered in Budapest in November 2024 in order to discuss how to win from the left. Thanks for tuning in. To weave a strong bloc was a panel that looked at building alliances across class and difference. It featured Lee Anderson, MEP from the Left Alliance, Finland, James Schneider from the Progressive International, Bojana Novakovic from Macedonia, Serbia, and András Jámbor MP from Szikra, Hungary. The panel was moderated by Áron Rosmankes.
This is the first time in the history of our movement that we're using simultaneous interpretation devices. Thanks for joining us on this very special evening. It's been a long day for all of us, so thanks for staying here, keeping with us. We have a very exciting panel tonight, very exciting panelists. And the title of the panel is To Weave a Strong Bloc. Throughout the discussions today, and last night as well, we've discussed how to bring together different social groups across different classes, divides of culture, region, education. And so tonight we're kind of going to take the bird's eye view, look at how to build coalitions together, how to build a strong bloc. We have lots of ground to cover, and I'm very excited to be joined by, first of all, András Jámbor, our very own MP, founder. We're at the heart of his electoral fiefdom, and he's just launched his new campaign for 2026. We're happy to have him here with us tonight. Next to me, we have Lee Anderson. Lee is the most popular politician in Finland, from what I've heard, or at least the politician with whom the most Finns want to have a beer. Yes. Which is even more important, leader of the Finnish Left Alliance, former Minister of Education, and member of the European Parliament. To my left, we have James Schneider, Director of Comms for Progressive International, author, and strategist behind Jeremy Corbyn's multiple victories. We're very glad to be joined by returning champion, Bojana Novakovic, award-winning actress and organizer of Macedonia, a Serbian environmental group dedicated to fighting lithium mining, basically, in the Elder Valley. So I've introduced you briefly, but I'd first like to give you the chance to introduce yourselves as well, very briefly, because you have lots of stuff to discuss. And I'd like to start with a personal question. What brought you to political activism, and what's a moment in your political journey where you really felt that you managed to bring different groups together? And let's start with András.
First of all, I welcome everyone and thank you very much for coming to Budapest to attend this conference. I would like to connect the two parts of the question, how my connection to politics relates to what eventually became Szikra. I grew up in a family where my mother raised me alone after the Hungarian regime change. She worked for the Hungarian state services for child protection within a crumbling social welfare system. And this, frankly, is not the typical upbringing story of the Hungarian elite. And when we talk about Szikra, most people I have met in the movement are exactly this kind of first-generation intellectuals, people who moved to Budapest from the countryside, who are not the beneficiaries of the system of the past 30 years. They're not the people who benefited from the post-regime change events in Hungary, but rather the losers, or the children of the losers of this change. When we talk about Szikra, we first need to talk about how in Hungary, after the international neoliberal turn of the left in the 2000s, the left, or what we consider the left, basically died. So basically, the idea of a left-wing movement based on grassroots work with direct assistance, life chains, for example, direct action, preventing evictions, a left working with concrete actions and connecting these political actions to systemic change was simply not present at all on an institutional level. At the same time, it must be added that Hungary is a kind of semi-dictatorship. And from this perspective, doing politics here is a bit more difficult. For example, this is partly the reason why we at Szikra are not a party. Because currently we need to figure out the very basis from which politics can be conducted in such a system. And in doing so, perhaps we can also set an example for our Western, Northern, and Southern comrades. Because maybe this is the future that unfortunately awaits us all.
Bojana, you, what brought you to political activism? Yes.
So my name is Bojana Novakovic, and I'm originally from Serbia. I'm an immigrant, so I grew up in Australia. I'm originally from Yugoslavia. Now it's Serbia, where I'm from. And what's the question? Because we kind of already
What brought you to political activism?
Political activism. So I don't consider what I do political or activism. I consider it my citizen's duty, but I guess that is politics, and it is a form of what is popularly understood as activism, although I kind of think we have to challenge that term because it tends to, it's kind of become a profession rather than a citizen's right to react or act or be a part of creating a social structure that I want to exist within. Very shortly, very concisely, because honestly, these stories bore me a little bit. I grew up in, obviously a household that was forming itself in its own identity in a new country while the country that I was born in was falling apart. And so every single day was a political event in our house. I started organizing at the age of 14, organized a school walkout against nuclear testing that Jacques Chirac was in charge of. Some people might remember this. It was in the 90s. 3,000 school kids turned up. I got really embarrassed by some adults and never did it again. And if social media was around, they would have been shamed. It would have been revealed that I was bullied, and I probably would have done this my whole life. But then I ended up doing something else. And the way that so Marš Drine is a movement against lithium mining in Serbia. It was formed in end of 2020, beginning of 2021. The reason why I got politically engaged, or rather started this movement, is because there was literally no one else interested in doing it. Locals had been sort of assembling in the area that was in danger of being mined, but on a national level, really very little awareness existed on this. And so, I asked some people to form a group. They didn't want to. Okay, and then I said, I'll just start doing that because I wasn't working. I lost my health insurance. I lived in the US. All the jobs that I had were cancelled. So that's kind of how this started. And now it's built into a movement of hundreds of thousands of people on the street across 50 cities in Serbia. And it really now is in the hands of local communities. And by local, I don't just mean on the ground where the mine is supposed to be. I do mean the whole of Serbia as a local entity. So that's it.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I started out in my hometown when I was young. I was part of a group that was squatting spaces to get a space for a kind of autonomous cultural center, and also for getting low price spaces for artists to work. And I was very involved also in environmental groups in my hometown. And then at some point I got very frustrated by the fact that even the squatters, kind of all of our good political projects, stop at us needing something from the city council. So even the squatters were actually trying to get meetings with the city councillors, and guys in suits would come there and we wouldn't speak the same language, would have no kind of shared ideas or visions for what should be done. So the conclusion I draw was that all of these brilliant people working in the movements also need to kind of start working in politics to kind of get to the spaces of power so that we would have allies in the city councils or in the parliaments for the projects that we are working on. And I'm still on that road in a way, I feel, after almost 10 years in parliament. and 8 years as party leader now in the European Parliament, which in many ways is kind of the opposite of movements because it's so far away from everything. But you asked for these specific experiences as well. And I think one of the most interesting projects I have been a part of was, it's already quite a long time ago, but I have a friend who is a labor union activist from Thailand. She was contacted by some Thai berry pickers in Finland who had got into a fight with the company who had brought them there to pick berries in the forest under very precarious, underpaid, exploitative circumstances. So we took a car and drove into the middle of Finland, where we all of a sudden found ourselves in a situation where we had 50 persons from Thailand with no income. None of them spoke English, and they had no place to go because the company announced that we are not going to take care of you anymore. So we started calling our contacts, and the first one I called was some party activists who are also active in the Association for Unemployed People in a very small rural town right next door. And this turned into a 6-week project of people really showing solidarity to each other in the most amazing ways I've ever seen, like people with no common language, but clearly kind of really united in the fact that everybody thought what these Thai berry pickers what was being done to them was exploitative and wrong. So we had people from very different class backgrounds in rural areas of Finland participating for 6 weeks in these actions for the Thai berry pickers, taking care of them, making sure they had food, they had housing, we had bus transports everywhere we wanted to go. So I think for me that was one of the most important experiences in terms of political activism and coalitions.
So I grew up in London in England. And I was a teenager when the Iraq War started, and I think that's probably what began my politicization. But I didn't get into activism or being an active citizen or, doing one's civic duty or however we want to view it, being democratic, until quite a lot later. After university, I became a journalist. I was focused on Africa. And I was reporting around the continent. And that was my attempt to engage with the world. But I wanted to do something back home in Britain, but I didn't really know what to do. And then in the summer of 2015, the British Labour Party, which I had joined not because I thought it was going to be good, it just lost an election and it was moving in a right-wing direction, or likely to, was having a leadership election. And there was this guy, this sort of scruffy old guy called Jeremy Corbyn, who had been around forever, goes to every protest, and was basically the only Labour politician I'd met because he was interested in the civil war in the Central African Republic. And he'd been taking part in interfaith roundtables and things that I had reported on. So I could tell that he was a decent guy. And I had 2 weeks off work. I come back from a big reporting trip, so I thought I'd go and volunteer. And then I never went back to work. And here I am now stuck working in politics. So I think that's how I came into it. And then one small example of different groups coming together. I mean, a lot, but a recent one that maybe relates to some of the themes from today. In the summer of 2022, in the UK, it was extremely hot. I know it's extremely hot in many other places, but it's very rarely very hot in the UK. So for us, it was a very big deal. And it got up to 40 degrees centigrade, record-breaking temperature. And I'm sure in many other countries, this is normal levels of heat, but in the UK, it was very alarming to a lot of people. And I'm close with a lot of the climate direct action people, Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, and so on. And they were thinking, well, this is a moment we have to organize around. But they could see from their organizing they've been doing in ways and ways beforehand that they needed to engage with organized labor in some way, and they needed to not be seen as so middle class and so removed from from working class struggles. So they had this idea that the next time it was going to be hot, they would call a strike. But this wasn't really connected to workers going on strike. This was just like they were going to do a thing. And they came to speak to me about it. I said, do you think we can engage any workers? And I thought, actually, yes, there are groups. The Bakers Union, because heat in the workplace for them is extremely important issue. And so we had a whole bunch of meetings, and obviously, like as you say, people don't speak the same political language. They don't come from the same political culture. But after a while of meetings and discussion, they come together and they've got a joint campaign which is ready to go the next time it actually gets hot again in England, which, you know, it should happen, but it hasn't for the last 2 years. When it does, some workers will go out in some strike, and the climate direct action people will support them, and then that will lead to a mass action. And the thinking behind it is that when the media has to cover something and it's very, very boring for the editors who produce the programs, then that gives you an opportunity. So when it's the hottest day of the year, that's all that's on the news. It's like, it's really hot. Here are images of people eating melting ice creams and people with red faces and dogs in fountains and that sort of thing. So it's a good day to get some other news stories in. Like, an editor will put in a lefty radical news story just because it's not so boring as the other stuff that they've got. And one of the good things about having the bakers, I'll be very quick. One of the good things about having the Bakers Union is they're organized we have this chain called Greggs. And Greggs has a branch in Westminster Tube Station, the tube station that all the politicians go through every day. So next time it's hot, very hot, we'll be able to have those workers walking out, big media coverage because the media's already there, the journalists are already there, and it will build greater connection between the labour movement and the climate activists who put the workers at the front of their struggle rather than an afterthought.
Thanks for this strategic insights. Next time we want to change something in Britain, we'll target Greggs in Westminster. We'll have to find the local equivalent here. So throughout these discussions, these past days, we've talked a lot about the necessity of bringing in together different blocks, different groups to craft alliances, and the challenges and also the successes and joys of doing this. It's also a very challenging moment politically because we're confronted by global crises, but at the same time, our societies are very divided. We have the silos of social media, people disenchanted with the democratic process, labor, which is very disorganized. And so the question that keeps coming up is, how do we build a strong bloc? And who are the social groups we want to target specifically in our movements? We have an expert in terms of blocks here, James, who even wrote a book about blocks. And so maybe if you could say a few words about what you mean by a block, and if then we could have a little round of reflections on the social groups or different forms of activism target specifically and want to bring together.
So a bloc is more than an alliance or a coalition. A bloc is made up of the social groups that can come together to challenge power and to seek to govern society for themselves in their own interests. So you can look at the ruling bloc and you can see how that's constructed, how the different sections of the ruling class come together, how they have particular weapons, bits of the media and so on that they can use to do that. And in the social groups that they try to either genuinely represent in some way or to peel off from the popular bloc, from what could be from the social majority. So when I'm talking about a bloc, I don't just mean how can we have an alliance that might come and go. It's a question of how do we move beyond mobilizing into organizing so you can build a lasting unity between different social groups so that you can take groups that make up, we know we represent the many in theory, we have a sociological majority, but how do you unite those organize within and across them, and also mobilize them, so that that sociological majority can function as a social majority, i.e., it can have enough power across every single terrain of social struggle that it can push back against the assault from the ruling class and its bloc. And I suppose the final element of that is, once you are able to have a growing social majority that is winning and is able to fight on all of these terrains, then you can begin to turn that into a political majority, which can then actually govern on behalf of and with the bloc itself, rather than try to represent something which doesn't have the force itself yet to take power.
Can you give an example of what you imagine as your ideal bloc in the UK?
So, I mean, I'll give the UK in a second, but there's no ideal bloc. Every single bloc is going to be contingent on historical circumstances, country, and so on. But the idea that we can't do it is ridiculous. So if you look at two other countries that I work with through the Progressive International, but Brazil and Colombia, where we have good examples of bloc building. You go, Colombia had never had a progressive government in its history, but was able to win one 2-3 years ago based on organizing all of the popular sectors. So Afro-Colombian, working class, indigenous, feminist, and so on, and increasing the turnout among all of those groups, but representing them through one common campaign, which was that of Gustavo Petro and Francia Marquez. Or you look to Brazil, and again, coming out of dictatorship, you don't just have the party, the PT, but extremely powerful trade unions, social movements, the Landers Workers Movement, a PB, the indigenous movement, Afro-Brazilian movement, and so on and so forth. So when you look around, you're looking, what are the social constituencies that have enough to align them that they could unite sufficiently to form a social majority. So in the UK at the moment, I would say that's made up of three social constituencies, three core social constituencies. That doesn't mean that you're not interested in anyone else, but it means that those are the three core ones that strategically you have to find ways to unite, and division amongst them is your greatest enemy. So in the UK, the three ones would be the asset poor working class, downwardly mobile graduates, and racialized people. And do you want me to talk a little bit more about each of those quickly, or no? There you go. Lee, maybe?
Well, I mean, even though I think personally I've defined it in a bit of a different way or with different terms, I agree very much on the analysis of kind of the need for the blocks to exist, for there to be change, also in terms of political change. I have some examples from Finland, for example, in 2019, where we had a shift in government to the most progressive government coalition that we've had during my lifetime. What preceded that was 4 years of organizing against the then right-wing government on very many sectors. So, you had the teachers were super active, the trade unions were super active, the students were active, and the environmental movement was really active. And what they managed to do through their own activities, in a way as a bloc, was to define the agenda. So in the elections in 2019, the big issues that were discussed was the crisis in the elderly care, like a very, core issue of the welfare states, core social policy issues, climate change, and also the need to kind of refinance our education system after 10 years of austerity. So when these movements or this bloc kind of through their own activities managed to push these issues on the agenda, it benefited the then opposition. So the parties with more progressive political stance did very well in the elections, were able to form a progressive coalition government with a progressive agenda. So I think this kind of shows the interplay between these movements. And at the same time, I have given a lot of thought on kind of the left in Europe at the moment, because I think after the Euro crisis, we were maybe not as organized as you were saying, but we were kind of in a situation where I think there was some kind of left European bloc even working in the same direction, developing a lot of kind of the same type of analyses and policies on, the economic policy mistakes that were done in the Euro crisis. There were a lot of organizing around the consequences of austerity policy. So we were kind of all very united in the anti-austerity agenda, which benefited movements and parties in different countries, and also was shown in kind of a progressive shift in government, not at the same time, not the same year, but consequently, in a time period of maybe 5-6 years after that. And one of our biggest challenges at the moment, I think, is that with all of the terrible developments going on around us, and maybe especially with kind of geopolitics, there hasn't really been these uniting issues for the left, which makes us weak everywhere, in a way. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see if this Trump election, if the silver lining on that black cloud is actually that it kind of energizes the left, because it brings back a lot of our common enemies and common struggles on the agenda, so that we could kind of re-enter a phase where we benefit from the work being done in different countries and by these social movements.
Thanks. Bojana, yesterday you were telling us about the very different constituencies brought together in the protests against lithium mining in Serbia. Could you say a few words about that as well?
Yeah, I'm a bit lost talking about the bloc, I have to say, because my experience, like when you defined it, I was just like, this is scary. This sounds dictatorial. This sounds like not something that would ever succeed or we need right now. And I actually feel like and I can only speak in the Serbian context, for us, it is so important that no one knows who the fuck is leading who's doing what, who's agreeing on what. And actually the fact that people think we're fighting is why this movement is so successful. Because there's no leaders they're arresting people and they're putting them in prison, but there isn't like this one group or one person. And, Marsa Drine is a national sort of movement or group. And then there's a local constituency, and then there's 7 local organizations that belong to an umbrella organization. And we all fight on ideologies. We are all spectrums from right to left. But we agree on very, really substantial things of we are against corporate occupation of fertile land or any land, actually. And, we want to breathe clean air and have clean drinking water, and we want to preserve food sovereignty. And these things really unite us. And it's really been a challenge keeping politicians out of it. It's been a challenge. And I understand I'm sitting here with political actors. So, and I really love the way that you guys described coming into politics, because it is interesting. But it's been a challenge trying to explain to politicians, you have to stand behind us, not in front of us. You don't fund us. You don't come to our protests with flags. You come to our protests as individuals. And in Parliament, you say stuff about us that you agree with, but we are not a joint movement, because we would lose everyone. Because the situation in Serbia is so dire politically that the idea of right and left within our movement would just divide people even further. And this is kind of how dangerous it is. And our movement has to sort of contend with that. But at the same time, it has opened an absolutely incredible amount of dialogue between us personally. And this dialogue is everything from forming friendships and alliances interpersonally, and incredibly big arguments that result in people not talking. So this whole, my heart is beating, because I'm like, do I not understand the bloc? Is this really, for us, this kind of ideal to me feels like playing on the enemy's territory. It feels like playing politics the way that the winning blocs want us to play politics, because we never will win on those terms. And so these alliances for us are really different, and the formations of our social structures are really different within the movement itself. That's not to say this is a good ideal for us, but we're just nowhere near there politically in Serbia.
I want to give a chance to James to respond, but before that, I'd like to bring András in, because what you're saying felt very familiar in a way in Hungary, where there's a very strong anti-politician vibe. And for a very long time, the opposition has also been struggling with this issue. And so I wanted to bring in our own politician, András, who joins politics perhaps reluctantly, or I know reluctantly, and it's been a journey. So how do you feel about this question?
In the 2010s, I also engaged in lots of activism in Hungary. We organized a 100,000-strong protest against the so-called internet tax, and a similarly large protest against the takeover of a Central European university. And these are quite significant achievements in a country of 10 million people. We organized a long series of protests against the constitutional amendments, and not just protests, but also various other activist actions. We tried to organize against the outlawing of numerous progressive ideas in the Hungarian constitution. During this period, I founded an internet newspaper, Mérce, which operates on 0 forints. It is functioning solely on reader support. It has continued to operate in that way ever since I left. So essentially, we lived through these years in the 2010s when we said that no politician should come to our events. They should not take hold of our issues because their presence only divides people. And in doing so, we basically reached a point where the political left has essentially ceased to exist in Hungary, because the only thing that mattered in Hungarian politics over the past 10 years is which side you are on regarding Viktor Orbán, whether you are for him or against him. So basically, all forms of ideology, all forms of political policy thinking have ceased to exist in Hungary. Politics was basically reduced to one dividing line, dividing good and bad in people's minds, depending solely and exclusively on Viktor Orbán. And many of us on the progressive side were saying that we don't want politicians of our own. We don't want those people who could represent us. This had complex reasons, of course, but it paved the way to the fact that in 2024 in Hungary, a former Fidesz member appeared literally out of nowhere. He founded a party and is practically neck and neck with Viktor Orbán in the polls. But if you look at his politics, there is not a shred of policy thought, nothing about what he wants to actually do with his country, only anti-Orbánism. So the anti-Orbánism eventually brought people together, or is doing so. And what I consider the principle-driven politics, the management of public affairs, has been taken out of politics by exactly those people who have been against institutional politics, party politics, and politicians over the past 10 years. So if we look at the situation, basically by trying to rise above party politics, we arrived to a situation in which our own party politics have been abolished. This is why I would be very careful with this kind of anti-politics, because at the end of the day, decisions will be made by representatives. Obviously, if we want to go beyond this kind of thinking and say that we should abolish the representative system altogether, it's obviously an option. But fundamentally, if we give up representation, but do not offer anything to replace it, then we're abolishing the possibility of politics of our own. Anyway, to quickly answer the original question, I think the issue is where these fault lines lie, and whether we have enough energy and resources to fill these fault lines with a left-wing agenda, for example, to fight for our own vision for the world. In Hungary, there was a series of protests that started because of a change to labor law in 2019, which increased working hours. We dubbed this the slave law, and a large series of protests took place. And at one point, the liberal parties and politicians took these protests to the headquarters of the Hungarian public media, carrying out an action of their own. This was, by the way, a year before the Serbian public media takeover, which is quite an interesting fact. These two stories are very much intertwined. What eventually happened was that the workers' issues, which I think would mobilize those very groups needed for a coalition leading to regime change, and who must be addressed by the left. Their demands were totally hijacked by the media, because the politicians who had access to that media had simply more resources, and there is no left in Hungary that could have taken these issues up. Basically, they pushed the protests towards a liberal agenda. But this wasn't even the end of it, because at the end it simply slipped into crude anti-Orbanism. In the end, it just became about this one term, O1G, which is basically an abbreviation for Orban's a dick, which won't translate well into English. So basically the point is the whole protest wave moved even from a madly liberal agenda to being reduced to complete, simple anti-Orbanism. And everything that could have represented any value or reached any social groups normally not involved simply fell to the wayside, since the protests focused only on the anti-Orban sentiment, which resonated well with the middle class, but other groups didn't buy it. This is a dangerous thing, and the reason why it is difficult to build social coalitions. The reason being that the structures needed to do so simply do not exist. There's no left wing, no strong trade unions, and no media that would be sensitive to these issues. In Hungary, there is essentially no radio or television stations that aren't in the hands of a government. This may sound familiar to our Serbian friends. There are, of course, online portals, but they are completely dependent on clicks, which means they always capture the moment rather than focusing on what long-term interests can be achieved. This means it is very difficult to build within these structures. But I will try to give an example later, or a few examples of how it can be done.
Thanks, András. We arrived to the political parties question earlier than I expected, but let's jump right to it. I wanted to give a chance to Lee to respond as the person who's been in institutional politics the longest since your early 20s, right? And so you have this rich experience and you've been in this world. Now you're even more in this world being in Brussels. How do you maintain your relationship with movements outside parties as the leader of a government party?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is not one truth to relationships between political parties and social movements. I mean, they are things that are in change constantly on a European level, on a national level. As we heard here, I mean, for example, clearly at the moment in Serbia, there is no opening, no channel into the kind of parliamentary system or the system of parliamentary politics.
I think there was something lost in translation. I don't want to interrupt you, but we work with politicians. It's just that we do not let them run the movement. Yeah. And there are actually two politicians who built their careers on the shoulders of the movement. And I don't need to say this, but I probably do. The administrative work of the movement is done by women. Yeah. And these two are men, and this is a very typical thing. And, we're told to shut up. But we do work with them. It's just that there's a very specific role that they should play. And we constantly have to help them understand that. And then constantly also, I guess, shelter our own sort of communities in the way that we organize so that that can stay safe. Sorry, I just wanted to make that clear. I think it was lost in translation.
Okay, good. I mean, looking at my experiences, I mean, the social movements that have been important in my country, they don't align with parties either. I mean, I'm using that kind of phrase. I think what they are interested in are those politicians who can be real allies in a meaningful way. And it's kind of up to us then in the parties to show whether we are ready to work in that way and who of us are. But I think looking at it from more of a party point of view, I think then you really see how dependent you are actually also on social movements for change. Because my experience is that no new ideas are born within, the parliament. They always come from outside. And the times that we have been the most successful, also within the parliamentary system, it's been because there is a push and a demand outside. So without that kind of interconnection and that interplay, it's very difficult to be in a situation where you create change. When you are in the situation of power, it's even more difficult. I mean, there are so many examples of very progressive, good left parties who then, when you get into power, usually you lose the next election. That's very few examples of parties who have been able to kind of overcome that problem. And why? There's one reason is, I think we saw, of course, you kind of see a decrease in activity also within the social movements in a situation where, the parties that you usually agree with are in power. When we were in government, it was during COVID. So we had a lot of very difficult issues also, for example, regarding cultural workers because of the COVID restrictions and the way that it really hit the whole culture sector. And we would have loved to do even better policies. We did everything we could, that they were not happy and they had to have the complete right not to be. And then they go out and protest the progressive coalition government. And they have every right in the world to do that. So I would say that being in power is probably the most difficult for the left in this respect. We've also seen in Finland, we saw, I think, a situation in 2009 where a lot of people from the social movements went into party politics, which also created this kind of vacuum in the social movement part. So things are like in constant change, but when it works at its best, then I think it really works in this mutually supportive way, where social movements, create content and ideas and create a demand for certain change that then the allies and the people working within parliamentary structures then can grab onto and start enacting as real policy changes. And I still think that in terms of voters, the people who vote, you need to go and be in power every now and then, even though it might mean that you lose the next election, because otherwise you don't have the credibility, especially if you want to work within the party structures, for building people's trust in your capabilities of bringing about real change in the long term.
Thanks. I wanted to ask James about your experience, which kind of straddles party politics and movement building. You're the co-founder of Momentum, which was mentioned in the previous discussion as well, which was a grassroots, or is still a grassroots movement, but whose energy was eventually channeled into the Labour Party, which was then later co-opted by the right. So I'm curious, what are your reflections on creating a social movement which worked very closely with a political party? What are the lessons learned and what are the next steps?
So I think the first thing I want to say is that in the same thing when we're talking about party form or the ecology of a system which might make up a block, shouldn't be frozen in aspic from one time. We've had a big problem across the left in that the particular form of organization that the Bolsheviks had to work with, given that their party was illegal and so on and so forth, then gets carried through in an overdetermined fashion into other contexts when that isn't the case, or the same thing with the structure of second international parties. So I'm not saying that the one thing is the context for, but on movements, I think again going into defining terms, I think there are two different types of movement, or at least how they relate to politics and to power and to parties. So there's one type of movement which is creating, I would say, organizations for power building. So a couple of examples of those could be in the Indian state of Kerala, for example, there are millions of workers, mainly women, organized in a cooperative production sector, loads and loads of co-ops that are related to each other. Now, this is organizations for power building. It can be slow, it grows year on year, and that has a particular type of relationship to a political party, in this case, the Communist Party of India, Marxist, which it necessitates a strong umbilical relationship between the movement as organization and the party, because it is trying to rule for itself. It's trying to govern society for itself. Then there's another type of movement, which is the movement as campaign, which isn't trying to rule society, is trying to win specific sets of goals. And that necessitates a very different relationship with political parties and with politics, because it's that sort that is tried to be co-opted and its energy to be co-opted. So there's not a one-size approach, I think, to the relationship between movements and movements and politics, because ultimately, what is it that we're trying to do? You know, what is it that we're here discussing? We're ultimately discussing democracy. How is it that people can rule themselves? How can they govern themselves? How can they not have other people deciding their lives for them? And that's got, there are two key components to it. One is the ability to say no and to build up sufficient force that you can say no. And the other one is in construction, i.e. the power building type. Now, because of the history of, I can't speak for every country, but because of what's happened in the last, let's say, 40 years, roughly speaking, what had been 100 years in many, many societies of building up alternative bases of power have been eroded in different ways. So there's sometimes a tension. I think sometimes when we're talking about these things, we get into artificial tension, because we're talking about the power of movements to push back against what's being done to us, and also the idea of having movements that are part of organizing a construction for us to rule ourselves. So then to speak more specifically about momentum and the Labour Party, when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader. So the party was porous to movement demands in both senses. So in the movement as campaign demands, so for example, Extinction Rebellion emerged in a big way in the autumn of 2018, and then even more strongly in the spring of 2019. And despite Jeremy Corbyn being a lifelong environmentalist, Labour didn't really have much to say about climate breakdown and Green New Deal and these types of policies. But because of being porous, being open to this huge pressure coming from below, in about 6 months, the party wrote what at the time was, I think, the most advanced environmental program, and put it at the heart of the program for the next government, which obviously we didn't form. But here we see the difference between a party which is porous, i.e. it's open to it and it's umbilically connected to it, because you change the leadership of the party, and rather than listening to the environmental direct action protesters, to asking to come in to brief us, to tell us what we're doing wrong, you get the next leader, our ham-faced Prime Minister, who says that his message to environmental protesters is get up, go home, I don't support you.
Yeah, that's a message we cannot get behind. We can agree on that. The question of the porousness of political parties is an important and interesting one. And I think it brings us to the question of unlikely alliances and coalitions. In the past days, some of the most touching stories have been personal stories of building trust and building community and comradeship with unlikely people. Bora's stories of working with miners, Christina with the ex-miners in Czechia. And that's something I wanted to bring in now. Maybe starting with András. We have a very specific situation in Hungary, which is perhaps not unique, with the poorest segments of society voting for a government that enacts policies that go directly against them. And this is something we've experienced here in the district as well. So how to reach out to these people and how to integrate them into your political projects. And this is an issue we're obviously facing within the movement as well.
I don't think this is unusual. If we look at the US presidential election campaign and how votes are distributed, we see similar dynamics in practically every election. This is because the fault line produced by globalization are present. Lower social classes tend to move to the right, while urban intellectuals vote more to the left. I believe this has been a general trend everywhere for about 20-25 years. I would also like to quickly respond to the previous point, whether it is possible to create a movement based on specific issues separately from a movement aimed at gaining power, and whether we have enough resources to pursue both. In my opinion, we simply don't. At least in Eastern Europe, we're dealing with a very much under-discussed issue. People who have the actual skills to engage in politics tend to leave for the West. So very few people remain who are capable of doing politics. Building media representation is hard because you simply won't reach the people you want to organize later. When activists who take action are imprisoned, it becomes significantly harder to involve a different kind of people. And of course, not everything that works in the West necessarily works here as well. To give some examples, I represent an individual electoral district covering Józsefváros and Ferencváros. Here, one must gain 50 plus 1% of the votes. Or actually, not even that much. 48% is enough against a candidate from the one-party system. In my case, I had some luck, because my opponent in the district is the former faction leader of Fidesz and the person responsible for numerous smear campaigns. So what we try to do, opposing them, is to see what kind of services we can provide to the people. Interestingly, Corbyn is doing just the same. We provide services, for example, addressing the significant problem of debt collection, which is privatized in Hungary and handled by private companies. The legal framework behind this is incredibly complex, and it is often abused. So we operate a legal aid service for local residents affected by this issue. In Hungary, with a population of approximately 9.8 million, around 600,000 people are currently subject to some form of debt-related procedure. I have recently managed to push for legal change in this area, making it one of my key focus points. We're also working to prevent evictions in various ways, maintaining a legal aid service and proposing legislative changes in Parliament to improve the system, but also highlighting how corrupt it is and how it reinforces the ruling party's power. We aim to reach people through a four-pronged approach, providing direct assistance, explaining legal matters, and involving them in political work. But let's be honest. Engaging lower-class and impoverished individuals in political activism, especially within the leftist movement, is not an easy task. There is a cultural leap that is very hard to bridge. At the same time, we provide energy-saving support by directly funding items that help people reduce their energy consumption. Recently, we also launched a women's self-defense course in the district, responding to widespread concerns about safety in the area. So we have these direct assistance initiatives. If we cannot reach people through the media, we must knock on doors, be present at marketplaces, engage with people, and use these personal connections to communicate concrete proposals to them. This is the situation we're working with. For example, right now, the proportion of people over 60 in the room is probably low, but during a campaign, that proportion is high, because we can reach people from the lower middle class, and we can involve them in the campaign since they're already retired and have free time. In this sense, we have some organizational success, but overall bridging these class differences is extremely difficult. Not just reaching out to people and helping them, but actively involving them.
This is an issue you've been facing as well, Lee, as a party leader with large segments of the traditional working class voting for the True Finns, a far-right party. And so I was also wondering if during your time as a party leader, as a minister, or now as an MEP, you found unlikely allies and good coalitions, which in places you didn't expect.
Well, I think I find them many times, but I think maybe one interesting example was actually the European election results, not only in Finland, but also in the other Nordic countries, because what we saw in the European election was a counter-development, a reaction against the far right and their government policies, where you actually saw, for example, the Left Party did very well in the areas that we have been struggling with, like more rural cities, for example, with lots of working class populations, also in the suburbs and so on. So I think in that election, a lot of voters that are usually maybe sometimes Social Democrats, sometimes True Finns, sometimes something else. I think you saw them all coming together in that election behind one party. And I think that has a lot to do with the work that was being done, that we had been doing against the True Finns and against the government. So maybe reflecting back, I'm not an expert on US policies at all. But I think really what you saw there was also this, what happens when there is like a disconnect completely between the people you say you are serving and the political elite. Like you have a well-educated kind of elite of policymakers within the Democrats who just, announce that we have these good policies for you. You should vote for us, but no kind of real connection to the people that were concerned. So I don't think you can go around it. There's no way of campaigning yourself around the fact that you need to build trust among the people that you want to serve, to have this real kind of connection that you hear and they feel they have some channel, a way of expressing what policies they want delivered for themselves. I've never in my entire time in politics, I have never met as many people crying as I did during the EU election campaign, who came to our party events to talk about the difficulties they were facing because of the cuts in social security by the government, and also more general fears and worries about in which direction the country is going. And I think you have managed to create kind of some level of trust, I do think, if people feel comfortable enough to cry in front of you or together with you, or to even come to a political event to do something like that. But it's something that you need to work on for a long time. I also, because I'm this policy nerd, so I also have to say something about that. Because I think what you saw in the US was the same thing that killed a lot of more progressive governments in Europe, which was that we had not been developing leftist policies for this situation of inflation and rising cost of living. And I saw this when we were in government myself, that we didn't have the tools at all for addressing increasing price of energy, food, and rent the way we should have. I remember my colleague from our party that was minister in charge of the social security system and pensions. She came to a meeting where she said that nothing in the social security system is designed for a situation where people have high expenses, but the whole system is designed on having low income. So we're kind of not able to deliver the kind of policies that we should have been able to do in a situation of rising cost of living. And I think exactly the same went for the Democrats in the US, in addition to all of these other problems that they were facing, which once again, for me, also shows the importance that the left knows organizing can build trust among these communities, have a connection to the people that we say we work for and together with. But we also need to focus on the actual policies for us then to be able to enact things that really make a difference for people once we have power.
You have a question of rising energy and food costs is something the left must address because it's the new normal and is going to be like this forever. So we need to get our shit together. But just getting back to unlikely allies and coalitions, Bojana, I wanted to bring you in because yesterday you talked in a very beautiful and forceful way about the kinds of uneasy alliances you had to build and work on and how to hold conflict. And so I wanted to ask you, did anything surprise you in this organizing work?
Yeah, I think I need to sort of attach this conversation to what's been said previously as well. I don't believe that we should be in power. I really don't. I think we need to break down the power structure. And I think the fear of what that looks like and all the politicizing and intellectualizing around this conversation of what would happen, food shortages, power shortages, this, that, and the other. I believe that we absolutely need to destroy the power structures that exist and not join them and not keep facilitating them and not keep on validating them. I do think that political intervention can happen. I think it needs to take place in the form of eliminating terrorist enhancements for activists. It needs to take the form of helping activists who are in encampments and doing civil disobedience, maybe legalizing that as public expression. But I don't believe that playing on the power field is actually the solution. I think it's been proven for centuries that it's not, and I don't know why we're not looking at very, very different forms of political structures and political coordination. I also think that with the US, you said something really significant, which I absolutely agree with because I've lived there for 10 years. I think the Democratic Party was way too concerned with destroying the progressive and more radical elements of its own party than it was with fighting with the Republicans. They've become the Republicans. The Republicans have become fascists, and there's no left. It's really one big corporate structure with two faces, and I just think this is really dangerous. I think the left is too polite. I think we're so busy considering how other people can consider us. It's just too polite, even to the point of not being aggressive and violent enough, even to the point of allowing fascists to define what violence is. And now I will absolutely get to our movement, because if we allow Vučić or if we allow Orban to define what violence is, we will be defined as terrorists and people who perpetrate violence by states that militarize, that surveil us, that criminalize us. These are really dangerous fucking things. And I get very concerned about people with high level of intelligence and integrity participating in it. So the movement really exists as a reaction to all of these structures. It really does, and this is why it's working. The movement is really difficult to organize and maintain, but that makes it really difficult to trace and understand, which is really, really convenient for us and really bad for corporations, really bad for the police and really bad for the government and really bad for the EU and the US and London and all the embassies that want this lithium from little old Serbia, from a village, that feeds people. So in terms of creating unlikely alliances, I guess I can only start from my personal experience, which was absolutely pro-EU, pro-a bloc, pro all of this stuff, until, we started digging into, number one, the social structures of the people who own this land, who live there, who are against the mine, and number two, the EU's involvement and the contradictions between, wanting the lithium from a country that is polluting Europe, by the way, as a means for us to join the EU, but then it completely contradicts EU environmental law, right? What the mine would do. And And I think as organizers, initially, I think all of us went in there quite wide-eyed, open, the locals and myself. Like my personal experience is, as soon as anybody from outside calls the locals, their first reaction is, you're the only one that can help us. I mean, this was like a conversation I heard them have with so many different people. And I just thought, no. And it was amazing to actually see, you mentioned something about, skills for politics. These people locally have such defined political skills without even knowing it. Defined understanding of cultural and historical structures of where they live, and just instinctively, without degrees. They're amazing politicians, actually, but they don't want to join a political party because this is a very corrupt system within Serbia. And what happened for us is that, this movement through conversation united scientists with farmers, elites and wealthy Serbians with people who are considered less elite. Although this village, I'm not going to romanticize poverty here. This is quite a wealthy village in terms of village life. They've kind of funded themselves. They've made their own roads. They're very proud people. But also united people who, a really right spectrum and very left spectrum. And these things, I can romanticize this stuff, but I can also talk about this is really difficult. It means that we have to be open to working with people who behave towards us or each other in ways that we don't support. It means that sometimes we have to have really awkward conversations. It means that sometimes we have to hold professors who are far right accountable publicly for what they're saying. And other times we need to figure out whether it's better to be quiet. It means that you have to be open to speaking with chauvinists, and you have to listen to people that you don't agree with and give them power. And this is a really difficult thing. And I think this is something, I'll bring it back right to these politics. It really is a really hard thing personally and for a community to give power to people that you don't politically agree with. But it does mean that you're listening to a community. You can't choose who lives on the land you're protecting. You just can't choose it, particularly in a political situation where land is privatized, And so I'll finish with this because I like to finish with something positive. I shared this last night, but not everyone was here. I shared a tent with a woman who is a poet, a cheesemaker, a rakia maker, a farmer who supports two men, lives in the country, has had 13 books published, and considers herself a Chetnik. And I shared a tent with her for 5 days in front of the presidency, and, called her a feminist, and she told me not to call her the F word. And we talked about what her ideologies are and what mine are. But the most important thing here between her and me and everyone in this movement, and it does involve many groups, is that these ideologies are absolutely not presented to the public as part of this movement. They are something that we talk about and learn from each other about. And I have to say, I believe we're right on the left. Like, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to be righteous and I'm going to say we're absolutely right because we are. This is what history shows. And if you think that nature and life is sacred, we are right. But this doesn't mean that other people who do vote against their interests, these are their interests. And I think we have to confront ourselves with the fact that some people don't want to breathe clean air. They don't want to have healthy kids. They don't care. They really don't care. And we can't keep making them stupid. This is a choice they make. And unfortunately, these are choices that they want to make. And so I think, for us, not kind of these conversations don't exist in public discourse about the movement. What exists is environmentalism, science and human rights. But yeah, it's a cool movement. It's hard, but it's good.
Thanks for keeping it real. Talking about that, it's really cold, but I'd just like to go through 2 more questions before we open it up to the public, and we still have a concert tonight, so we shouldn't be late. I wanted to bring in the question of communication, because today with social media, we see different groups being targeted with different discourses. It's becoming harder and harder to develop a grand narrative and to speak to the whole population when everyone is kind of in echo chambers of their own. So I wanted to ask your experiences in terms of creating a communication strategy which works across these divisions? And starting with James, perhaps, who's an expert at communicating.
So the most important thing about communicating has got absolutely nothing to do with what you say. I think the most important thing about communicating is who you are in conflict with. That's the thing that is most visible to everybody. And that defines whatever your project is, whatever your organization, whatever your campaign, whatever your party is, who is fighting it and who it is fighting is by miles the most important thing. So take, for example, a traditional centre-left party. It fights a traditional centre-right party. So people will think that that's what it's part of. You know, maybe a left populist party might be fighting against the elite or the establishment or whatever it might be. Who you are fighting and who is fighting you, even more importantly, who's fighting you, is the most important thing. And then one level down for the next most important thing, still nothing to do with what you're saying, it's what you do. Like what Andres was talking about with organising, it's way more powerful to be organising debtors or people who can't pay their bills or people who have issues with safety or tenants who have mold and damp. That's a much more powerful way of people to know who you are and what you're about, even before you've said anything. Because, and this is even more the case with attention spans and social media and the fractured communicative space and all of these things. So I would say the most important thing for communicating is about doing much more than, of course, then you can come into narratives and frames and strategies and tactics and everything you do. But much, much more important than that is who you're doing it for and who you're doing it against.
Lee, you're very good at social media. What's your secret?
My secret is I know absolutely nothing about communication. Nothing at all. I have no training in that. So I just go with my own instinct, I guess. And I think the one thing I have gotten the most thank you for during my political career is that I answer questions, like also from journalists. Like I answer the question that they pose. And then I also tell, people why I think the way I do.
Bojana, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I guess, we're in a media blackout like you guys, right? Like, it's not even just government media. Vučić, he is the owner of the media. He's the lead, he's the lead presenter of the media. Everything is just Vučić in Serbia, right? And everything that he does, including when we get time on national frequencies, we know that he's given permission, right, for that to happen. 100%. He micromanages the media. It's quite hectic. So we use social media. And I think, again, don't forget, we just can't forget that social media is a marketing tool. It is owned by, obviously some of the biggest corporations in the world, and it is absolutely a marketing tool. And I love the way you use it. And I really do. And I think we really used it a lot in the beginning. And one of the biggest things that we did, because I did the media campaign, we really manipulated the story with the truth. We manipulated their propaganda with science, with fact, and with introducing the locals. This was a huge part of the campaign. There were so many people who wanted to stand in front of this campaign. And I really think my career as an actor actually helped that I didn't. I had no interest in it, but people were putting me forward because then it would give it a little bit of attention. And so what I would do is I would say to news outlets that invited me, I would say, yeah, I can only come with Mariana from the village, or with Marica from the village, or with Zlatko. And then one day I remember really significantly, a reporter who knew me called me and said, I want you to come in. And I said, yes, sure. And then I called her. I was too tired. It was 6, but I'd already called the villagers and said at 3 a.m, you have to go to Belgrade to be on the morning show at 6. And she was yelling at me. She was like, why aren't you here? I've been doing these reports for you. I helped you with a campaign. And I said, I'm so sorry. I don't feel well, but I think they're there. And it was these 5 farmers, and they came with masks. It was COVID. And it was the best reporting that she had done on it, because it was the 5 of them. They looked like the 3 Musketeers plus 2 with masks, and they didn't have enough chairs, so they had to stand. They looked like a barbershop quartet. But they're smart. This is the thing that the media wasn't willing to acknowledge, is like, I can speak about the facts and I can speak in the way that I speak, and certain people will listen, but these people know how to reach a far wider public because they're intelligent, they speak people's language, they're vicious, like they're incredible. And so now they don't even call me. They just have direct contacts with local community members, they have direct contacts with various kind of actors in that, and that was really, really important to do that.
András, as a journalist, and also you're very famous for your very authentic selfies and TikToks as well, if you could say a few words.
In my opinion, the most important thing about these platforms is honesty. I believe it's obvious from miles away whether someone truly believes in what they do or say, or if they're just trying to manipulate. But I would also like to argue that believing in the democratic nature of social media is the greatest self-deception. My favorite Hungarian statistics on this issue concerns Facebook, which is by far the worst. It's truly the deepest circle of hell in the entire meta-universe. Anyway, my favorite fun fact is that during last year's Spanish election campaign, Fidesz spent more on Facebook ads in the same period in Hungary than the entire Spanish election campaign did. And this was just some random summer month in Fidesz's routine operations. So they typically use their entire state apparatus to define and defile their political opponents. While we're focusing on honesty and telling the truth, they try to destroy us by telling our story with much more power and much, much, much more money. As a result, these social media tools become much less useful on their own. Just to give a concrete example, last week, an interview was published about a Hungarian political figure, and scrolling, I had identified 56 fake profiles, all registered in the previous month, posting well-structured smear comments that reinforced the same narratives. This said, social media is essentially the only tool we have to communicate with people, because everything else is controlled either by these autocratic leaders or by big corporations. And in reality, social media is also in the hands of large corporations, just different ones. I think the big question is whether it is possible to endure this, and whether activist work on the streets, collecting email addresses and reaching out to people, can replace traditional and social media, because in the long run, neither of these is a stable foundation for building politics. Fortunately, we have managed to run good campaigns here by mixing these elements, but in the long term, we constantly need to adapt. In fact, this isn't even in the long term. Just to add one more quick thought, we need to continuously change what tools we use and keep reassessing our strategies.
Okay, we'll take this as a sign, and also the fact that we're all freezing to have the last round of questions. I just wanted to bring in internationalism, because we've been talking about internationalism, because we've been talking about bringing together different groups of people, but we're all very much embedded in our local contexts, whether it is a municipality, a country, a region. And it's very hard to build coalitions and effective alliances across the world, but it's also the only way forward, because we're confronting global challenges. All of your struggles have global internationalist components. And so I just wanted to quickly gather your thoughts about what you've learned in organizing transnationally. James, for example, you're the person behind the Make Amazon Pay campaign with Progressive International. You've also been active in terms of Palestine solidarity protests. Bojana, obviously, the anti-lithium organizing takes place in various countries across the globe. You've recently been to South America. You were telling us about it yesterday. András, you're one of the rare people whose media project also had a truly internationalist agenda, showcasing struggles from the global south, which is very rare in Hungary. And Lee, obviously, you've always had a very strong internationalist component to your politics. So if anyone wants to jump in and say how, in your experiences, this has worked and how you would continue it in your own practice going forward.
Whether it's the energy costs, rising food costs, or the floods that were here, flooded the Danube a couple months ago, or geopolitical tensions and crises, all of these things, we know that wherever we are, we're held in a global system. And that's a global system which is still defined by the colonial mode of accumulation. That's still the main way in which our global system operates. It just takes a slightly different political sheen. So, with my work, I work for the Progressive International, which is a global network of political parties, trade unions, social movements, peasants' organizations, liberation movements, campaign groups, and so on, mainly in the South, mainly in the global South, but also in the North. And our mission, alongside thinking that we can work to unite, organize, and mobilize those forces, is to support the rebellions that are already taking place in the South and to unite them with the littler rebellions that are taking place across the North. And I think all politics is very particular, and it has to speak with the rhythms and in the language of everywhere that it's situated, but it's all connected up to those things. So then, to be a bit more practical, a couple of examples of that work. So we co-convene a campaign called Make Amazon Pay with Uni Global Union, and we coordinate global days of action against Amazon. And we've got one coming up on Friday of next week, where hopefully there will be strikes and protests in 30 plus countries against Amazon, maybe 250, 300 actions stretching right across the world and all the way through Amazon's supply chain. So call center workers in the Philippines, garment workers in Bangladesh and in Pakistan, warehouse workers in France, and so on and so forth. You get the picture. And this also is not just about the labor issues, which of course are crucial to how Amazon operates, but these other issues like its environmental impact. Amazon emits more CO2 than 3/4 of the world's countries. And that's growing tremendously. Amazon claims it's going to be net zero by 2040. And since it made that pledge, its emissions have gone up 40% a year. Obviously, we know it doesn't pay any taxes, and it's also deeply complicit in the genocide that's taking place in Gaza through its web services it provides to the Israeli occupation forces through something called Project Nimbus, which it does alongside Google. So through bringing together these different struggles that are divided by subject, by theme, by interest, by language, by geography, we can begin to provide a broader front. We do the similar thing. I'm guessing I'll stop because it's cold, but similar things with organizing for Palestinian liberation. One of the projects that we work on is to prevent or chase around ships that have jet fuel for Israeli fighter jets or arms for the Israelis to kill Palestinians with from docking in European ports. And this is again, it's not just about working across borders with people in different kind of jurisdictions, but being able to work at multiple levels, being able to line up the direct action, people who are willing to put their bodies on their line, with lawyers who can write statements, with trade union branches that are willing to mobilize their workers, with politicians that are willing to stand up, with media that can be activated. And I suppose the thing, to bring it right back to what are we talking about, weaving a strong block or whatever, what is it we're talking about? We're starting from an incredibly low base, because the world is not how we want it to be. We're all here because we want to abolish the present state of things. That's the purpose of our activism, or whatever we want to call it. And in order to be able to do that, in order to be able to tear down the power structure and to have something that is more freeing and collective, we're going to have to be able to act and operate everywhere all at once, to do everything everywhere all at once. And I think that's the task of internationalism. That's the task of building alliances. That's the task of meetings like this, is to better able us when we leave this room, when we finish whatever type of campaigning activity we're doing, any meeting we have with people, Zoom meeting, whatever it is, do we have a slightly more capacity to do everything together that we need to do to abolish the present order of things?
This would have been a very beautiful end word. But everyone has the right to answer as well. So I wanted to just make a quick round. András, Hungary is a very inwards-looking country, but we're obviously connected to the world. Can you say a few words about this? In your work, how does internationalism appear?
I don't think I would be sitting at this table if it weren't for Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn. Their two examples were incredibly inspiring to me, and I believe there are quite a few people in this room who feel the same. On the other hand, when I see a huge number of people gathered in Novi Sad after the tragic train station disaster, or when I see the achievements made in Finland, these things are incredibly motivating. They show that things can be organized, progress can be made, and true results can be achieved. And every time I follow an American campaign, by the end of it, I always find those 2 free congressional candidates who make me think, wow, this is how it should be done. So I think we can find inspiration, even if we're not in close alliance. We can draw strength from each other's work. And I honestly think complaining about the situation in Hungary is obviously one of the worst activities to do. And it's important to remember that the successes that we achieve here can inspire others just as well. This is incredibly important in helping us endure the daily struggles, the smear campaigns, and other challenges. And even if the left doesn't have strong organizations, like those on the far right, I believe these connections still exist, even if we don't personally know each other. So that's my effort at saying something positive after my doomer speech.
Lee?
Well, I think we have some very important and defining years ahead of us, personally, because, the rise of this duo, Elon Musk and Donald Trump, will also fuel a lot of their friends all around the globe, and a lot of the movements, I think, in Europe, in the far and extreme right. So personally, I think this is really the time for the wider bloc to really for us to be as active as we can, focus on the issues that unite us, and understand that we're part of this ecosystem, and that at its best can work very well to change the order of things as they are now. I'm really interested in the global global south divide now, because I think the inability of kind of the West both to do something to stop an ongoing genocide in Gaza, but also in terms of the climate crisis, has created, I think, division that will take years and years to overcome. And I really think it's something that the left should have, however we want to define us, would have at the core of our own projects. So some of us might choose social movements, some of us might choose parliamentary politics. But I think this is a time to push together in the direction on the issues that unite us. Because personally, I think I have had enough of the left looking at pointing fingers at each other. Yeah. So I think we can draw inspiration. It's maybe the only thing we should draw inspiration on from the extreme right, but they have this really, how should I say, like aggressive and completely shameless way of doing politics, in a way with like 100% belief in their own kind of policies and alternatives. So that's what I'm striving for personally. And I also agree with, I think the point with these kinds of events and meetings and spaces is also that it, for me at least, it creates this type of energy, and it also reminds me that I'm part of this ecosystem. And I think we all need that feeling to be able to carry on doing whatever we choose to do.
The ending words are yours, Bojana.
It's too much pressure. I can't end. I'll just keep talking. No, I won't. No, I'll finish with an anecdote, like that's personal to our movement, because I think these guys sort of discussed more broad things. We no one really knew about this thing, this movement when it started, except the locals and some of us who were organizing. And then it sort of started to grow in Serbia. Some people that wanted to be politicians got interested in it. Then this guy made a protest. Then 20,000 people came. Then we decided to do it. And then 50,000 people came. It became this kind of healthy competition between weird egos. And but with a very serious topic at hand. But then slowly over time, certain factions of like intellectuals that we didn't know were probably studying this or studying what we're doing. And then all of a sudden in 2022, this guy, Aleksandar Matković, who, if you guys haven't heard of him, he's the person that received death threats for his economic paper about this mine. He contacted us and said, I kind of been talking to some people in Chile and Spain, and I really wanted to do like a declaration of unity between people fighting lithium. And I said, fuck yeah, let's do this. And I didn't know him. And then, certain people from somewhere complained that he worked for like the intelligence agency. And then other people and this guy, when you meet him, he can't hurt a fly. Like there's no way. And, he's the biggest nerd. And then these people were suspicious when we brought him to the village. And cut a long story short, we signed this declaration. But during the signing, which included people from Bosnia, Serbia, Portugal, Spain, Germany, Chile, and then these scientists came with us. And there was these conversations that took place between the people from Chile and the scientists, because our scientists in Serbia had a bit of a not in our backyard mentality about the lithium mining, like, in the desert it's fine, there's no water there. And they had this really serious conversation about water consumption with lithium mining. And what was amazing is that these scientists who were members of the Serbian Academy of Sciences basically on that day said, okay, no lithium mining here, no lithium mining anywhere. I just got shivers. And it was this extraordinary moment for us, because also the activists from outside of Serbia suspect they don't work well with scientists. They have scientists who work for the government who are paid, but we work with independent scientists who actually are against the mine. And it was this incredible moment. And then this declaration idea grew. And so certain groups formed from this. And, I belong to a completely informal group called the Kill CRMA group. This is what we called it. It's about the Critical Raw Materials Act. And we just shamelessly want to kill the act, right? So we're looking for ways to do it. And it's really fun. But then there's other elements of this coalition of people that signed this declaration that are about just supporting each other. Or some people go to Portugal, like I went to Argentina, and more people signed. So it was I just wanted to sort of share this kind of broadening of understanding that happened through this international coalition that even affected our sort of best, scientific minds, and this kind of cross-pollination of different social structures engaging in this through these alliances. It's quite incredible, just on a personal level and on an experiential level. And I think this is why we do it. At the end of the day, you want to feel something and relate to people. And these alliances and what you guys are talking create that in us. And so we want to do it more. We want to be involved.
Thanks for sharing these ending words. I'm going to do what a moderator shouldn't. I will close the discussion without questions because we're late and we have to attend a party at Greg's at 9 o'clock. So I'd like to thank our amazing panelists, András Jámbor, Lee Anderson,
James Schneider, and Bojana Novakovic. And thanks.
Thanks for tuning in. To find every other episode, follow our feed. This episode was produced by Levin Takatai. Thanks to everyone who made it possible.
Zengok harang, veled együtt zeng a szívem, őt látom, jön már felém. Muzsikál